I'm Jim Buck. It's my privilege to serve as the mayor of the city of Grandville and also to chair the Metro Council. So let me extend on behalf of the council a warm welcome to everyone, and we look forward to a really great day. Hard to believe that this is the 17th time that we have come together with our growing community conference. Kind of fun to go back and look at all of the locations and places that we held these meetings, all the way from hotels along 28th Street to Rockford High School, and then to even go one step further and to take a look at all of the topics that have been covered over the years, and there's just a great variety. So we always look forward to this. It's nice to have everybody here this morning. And let me just share a little bit about this year, our theme and what we want to do. We're happy to come back to the Prince Center. We have been using this for our quarterly luncheons, and they're great people to work with, and it's just worked out well. So welcome to the Prince Center. Welcome to the 17th Annual Growing Community Conference. This year's theme, Choosing Our Future, Innovations and Adoptions for Sustaining Community. The pace of the change in our society, I believe we would all agree, is unbelievable. We've endured about 10 years of economic challenges, and because of this, I honestly believe we are a stronger region that has adapted to rapidly changing occasions out there. One of the things that's come up very often lately is the word collaboration, and I think the collaboration that exists in Western Michigan is really basically a second to none, and it's something that we never want to lose. This year, we want to examine how innovation and new thinking is helping us to adapt to our new economic realities and give us the tools we need to sustain our communities and our region during these trying times. Our sessions this year have been organized around our need to continue the process of adapting and innovating to meet changing needs. In our efforts to adapt, we're starting our day with two sessions. The first, a detailed look at where we stand in this state and region with our economy, our efforts to jettison obsolete practices and reform government, and the goal shared by everyone in the state to restore prosperity to our state and to our people. Doug Rothwell, the president and CEO of the Business Leaders of Michigan, and our own George Bosnjak, the business development director of Right Place, these two gentlemen right in front of me here, will offer their thoughts and perspectives of where we are and where we need to be. Then we're going to take a short break, and Donald may dictate as to whether that's 10 minutes or whatever. Talk about breaks a minute. We always do an evaluation when we're done with these sessions. And it seemed last year that the feeling was that we had short-circuited the networking, so to speak, or the chance for discussion. So you'll notice there's a couple of different breaks, a little flexibility in our soul here, because we may have to shorten that a little bit, because then we want to hear Lou Bender, and here to lead us in a fast-paced discussion of the state of our state and what we need to do to stimulate some positive change. And I know that you will enjoy Lou's presentation. At that time, we take a little extended break, kind of hopefully go from about 10:45 to about 11:15. And then we'll participate in the 4 workshops. And I think we've covered a good area of, and if you look at your program, you can take a look and say, which one do I go to today? We'll break for lunch at 12:15, and at that particular time, we have the privilege, and that's in your program too, of honoring 2 new recipients. We began that blueprint situation back in about 2000, and I think we have covered since that time about 24 recipients. So we look forward at noon today to add 2 to that list. So we'll take care of that following lunch. And then in the afternoon, I don't think you could come up with anything better way to leave the session than a con debate. And we've got 2 really fine individuals, both strong advocates on each of the particular sides. Our good friend former Mayor John Logie from Grand Rapids, and the Michigan Chamber President Rich Studley. So that's going to be good, and that will follow the luncheon. If you're not into politics and you don't really care about CON, Jay Hookster is putting on another great program about some of the challenges in the planning. Talk a little bit about the Division Street project and things like that. So you got that second option just in case that I've heard enough about CONCON, I've got my mind made up, I don't need any particular more. Let me, before I turn this over to Don, let me extend a special word of thanks to our sponsors. They're the ones that help us make this possible. Partnering sponsors this year, the Michigan Municipal League and ITP, the Rapid. Contributing sponsors, Myers, Fishback, Thompson, Carr, and Huber, The Right Place Incorporated, Micah Myers, Beckett, and Jones, MSU, Kent County Extension, the Western Region, and Williams and Works. I also want to acknowledge the work done by something that we call the PI Committee, the Public Information and Education Committee, chaired by Tom McWhorter, and I saw Tom here someplace, and I extend my thanks, Tom over there, who's chaired that organization for some time. They're the people that come together to make this possible, and we're very thankful for Andy Bowman, Jay Hookstra, and Gail McCrath for all the work they do in coordinating this, and Tom certainly for his leadership. One last thing, we always talk about evaluation forms so that we can do a better job the next time around. When it's all over with, if you will fill those out and drop them at the desk, we would certainly appreciate that. Now, having said all that, and thank you for bearing with me, it's my privilege to introduce Don Stapula. Don's our executive director. Never sure how many years, time flies when you're having fun, so I don't know whether this is 6 years or 7 years, but I'm close in there someplace. My good friend Don Stapula, and let's give Donald a welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, wait. There's a buddy of mine sitting at a table. I'm not going to point to him right now, but he doesn't put up with that kind of a response. And I'm going to tell you that right now. So he's going to be talking later on. So I'm going to say just one more time. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, that's better. That's better. See? And they didn't think I could learn anything, Lou. I can. I'm delighted to have you here. I'm delighted to have each and every one of you here. I was talking to somebody earlier, and they said how difficult it is, even at the right price point, and a nice day, and a great number of topics that we're going to talk about. It is difficult to get people to peel away from their responsibilities which have grown like this, as staff to help has decreased like this, public and private sectors. So I'm delighted that each of you has taken the time to spend some time with us here today. And I think what you're going to find as you see this place in your rearview mirror, you're going to know a lot more about Michigan. You're going to know a lot more about the West Michigan region. And I think you're going to have a much more positive impression about the things that are going on at the state level, certainly in Lansing, Southeast Michigan, and here in the region. So we want to get that started. This morning, as Mayor Buck was talking about, we are going to look at the state of our state, where we are at right now, the state of our region here in West Michigan, and some of the things that are occurring in the public sector, in the private sector, in the collaboration between both to change our way of operating in this state, in our localities, in our businesses. Because change is necessary. Nobody likes change. The only people who like change are wet babies. We have to be like wet babies. We have to embrace the concept of constant change. The pace, as you know, remarkable, breathtaking at times. I'm going to talk a little bit about that this morning. To get us started, I have two gentlemen, very distinguished gentlemen, that are joining us here to roll us out, get us started, get us thinking, get us talking among ourselves. First one is Doug Rothwell. Doug is the president and CEO of the Business Leaders for Michigan. Business Leaders for Michigan emerged out of an effort in Southeast Michigan that operated for years and years. It was decided that the great ideas, the great thinking, the great collaboration that was going on there in Southeast Michigan needed to be exported across the state. And so he has now a large number of top-level CEOs from businesses all across the state who are collaborating with each other, erasing the lines between east, west, north, and south, and coming together to convince our elected leaders in Lansing that change is what we need, and we need it now. He's doing an excellent job. I've made the observation in the past, I'm going to make it here today. Love him or hate him, John Engler was a pretty good governor for Michigan. There are times I wanted to strangle the guy for things that he was doing. I was working for local governments at the time. I wanted to strangle the guy for this, that, and the other thing. But bottom line, in my 36 years around the state capitol, nobody, no governor, hired better trained, more consistent, more tuned-in staff people than John Engler. And Doug Rothwell was one of those individuals. He is the founding president of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So he is going to be here, start us out this morning, and talk about some of the wonderful things that they've been proposing and pushing in Lansing. Then to give us a regional perspective here in West Michigan, I have a very bright light here with us today. George Bosnjak is a business development manager at the Right Place Incorporated, our regional economic development agency here in Metro Grand Rapids, but throughout West Michigan. He has been with them a couple of years now. Prior to that, he was the DDA director, Downtown Development Authority director in Grand Haven. And prior to that, he was an intern with the Grand Valley Metro Council, specifically at our Regis Arm, Regional Geographic Information System. And I found him to be just an exceptionally bright individual, the kind of individual that you want to keep here, that you want to educate here, which we did, and we kept him here. And that's a good thing. So please join me right now in welcoming, first of all, Doug Rothwell, President and CEO, Business Leaders for Michigan.
Morning, everybody. I'm going to get right to it since Don's such a great job of introducing us all. Actually, I should probably sit down right now after that nice introduction, Don, and end it, because I can probably go nowhere but down. You've heard a little bit about our organization, so I'm going to skip over that and get right to the punchline, which is our whole focus is about jobs. Whole focus is about jobs. How do we get Michigan back to prosperity again? And this slide summarizes kind of our analysis of what the situation is, which is that Michigan has been in decline for decades. In the last decade alone, Michigan lost 50% of the job losses in America. Ladies and gentlemen, Michigan is responsible for half of what's happened to the United States in the last decade. 1 out of every 2 jobs lost in the U.S. were lost here in Michigan, 1 million jobs in the last decade. Only 25% of those jobs in the auto sector. And that's something that I always underscore, because people immediately think that everything's due to GM, Ford, and Chrysler, and it's not. It's a systemic problem that we have in this state, and we believe the root cause is that Michigan is not competitive. And when I use that word, I don't use it to define cost competitiveness, but just the lack of competitiveness in a variety of different areas, which I'll show you. There is clearly a need for a holistic strategy to get Michigan back on track. There are no silver bullets that are going to solve this problem, and Michigan clearly has locked a plan to do it. We have yet to hear, we've had good ideas proposed, but we have yet to hear a holistic strategy coming out of Lansing in terms of how we're going to turn this situation around. And it was a large reason why the CEOs from around the state said, enough's enough. We got to get together and see if we can put forward a strategy and try to drive that as best we can through the political process. You know where we are with unemployment? 50% above the national average. 50% above the national average. Michigan has not been in that situation that far above the national average in its past. As bad as things were back in the 70s and 90s, things never were as bad as they are right now. We are not the only state to go through these struggles during the last few years. In fact, if you look at the last decade, there are states up here in the red which have lost the most manufacturing jobs, states that have lost more of their manufacturing base than we have. North Carolina, a state that often gets cited as having a great economy and great prospects for growth, actually has lost more of their manufacturing base than Michigan has. If you think about it, they lost all 3 of their core industry sectors: tobacco, furniture, and textiles in the last 15 to 20 years. This is the problem that Michigan faces. This tracks job creation relative to the U.S. average and whether it's positive or negative growth over the last decade. If you're in the upper right-hand quadrant, that means that was a Michigan job sector that grew faster than the U.S. average and had positive growth. There was one out of 20 major job categories, and that was agriculture. And these bubbles up there are relative to the number of jobs in each of those sectors. So you see that even though agriculture is an important sector, it's a relatively small job-producing sector relative to others that we have. This is the problem. This is that we have underperformed the national average and have shrunk in 90% of the job categories that we have in the state for the last 10 years. As a result, this long-term slide we've been on means we've been getting smaller relative to other states, growing about 6 to 8 percentage points per year less than the average U.S. state. You see that in less political clout that we have in Lansing. We're losing congressional members as a result, and we've really gotten poorer. This shows our ranking relative to the U.S. in terms of growth and per capita income. Back in the 60s and 70s, Michigan was a top 10 state for per capita income. Today, we rank 37th. The point of this slide is we're poor. Alabama will pass us in the next 2 years. We will be poorer than Alabama. This means we don't have the money to invest our way through all these problems that we face. Investment in our future is important, but if we do it, we're going to have to pick just 1 or 2 areas. We don't have the luxury of doing 15 or 20, which is what we've done in the past in Michigan. You know about the state's budget problems. Why have there been those problems? Because of the slides I just showed you. Even when taxes were increased a couple of years ago for both business and personal income, revenue is flattened out again. And it's because the economy is simply not performing nearly enough to grow those revenues. So that's why there's a continual structural budget deficit that the state faces. This is where the state has invested money over the last 10 years, where the money has been spent relative to inflation. What you see is that look at the 2 areas that state government has disinvested in the last decade. Revenue sharing, you know what that is. That's revenue to support quality of life in local communities. Higher education, the future talent flow for our state's jobs. So disinvesting in the things that would most probably promote economic growth, spending more money than the rate of inflation in areas like health and human services, important, but clearly not the drivers of economic growth for our state. People are more mobile, jobs are more mobile than ever before. The left-hand side of this chart, the dark green shows the countries that are growing the fastest in terms of economic and job growth. The U.S. you see is not one of those dark green countries. It means that there's other places out there, not just cheaper, but more competitive, that can offer businesses the opportunity to do what they need to do. On the right-hand side, people are more mobile than ever before. This chart shows in the last decade alone mobility of people within the United States. Look at where they're going. South and west, trends that have been going on for 30 or 40 years, out of the Midwest largely, which means that we in the Midwest have got to be more competitive if we're going to both keep and retain and attract people and jobs for our future. We then looked at states that really are ranked the highest by a variety of different groups in terms of their perceived competitiveness, their perceived business climate. And these are the states that you find that get cited most often. Notice Michigan at the bottom, not ranked on any of those. We then looked at what are the top 10 states in terms of those that have actually performed the best, both in terms of job creation and per capita income growth. You see what those states are. You see that many of those states often get ranked as good places to be, per the previous slide. Look at Michigan at the bottom. We're ranked 48th in job growth in the last 20 years, 50th in per capita income growth in the last 20 years, and not cited as, by any of the rankings, as a good place to locate a business or to be an attractive place to live. Here's why we think what the problem is. We're in fact not competitive. The left-hand side of this chart shows The total cost of doing business in Michigan relative to other states. We're ranked 104 on that chart. That means that a business in Michigan to be here pays approximately 4% of their pre-tax profits greater than they would in the average U.S. state. 4%. Now that doesn't sound like an awful lot until you remember that for a lot of businesses, 4% is make or break. That's their profit margin. But what's really more important is look at the states that are ranked right below us. Those are the states we most often compete with for jobs. Look at North Carolina at 84, which means that if a business is deciding where to invest and grow, North Carolina versus Michigan, there's a 20 percentage point difference in pre-tax profit to be here versus there. Now, you can sometimes justify a 20% spread. If you're a financial services company, you got to be in New York, you got to pay the premium. If you're a high-tech company, you're going to want to be in Silicon Valley, you're going to pay the premium. Most companies don't have to be in Michigan. Michigan is not we do not have such a compelling business case that we can justify a 20% spread. And that's what our fundamental problem is. In fact, you see on the right-hand side that translated to where we actually are ranked in the minds of business job providers, CEOs, and the people that advise them, site location consultants, both of which rank us 48th best state in the union to invest in. So this is our fundamental issue. Now, I said before, it's not all about cost. This slide shows you just where we rank on the cost factors, especially those that state government controls, on business taxes versus individual taxes. You see, Michigan's not a bad state to be in for an individual. Our personal income and our sales tax rates are actually pretty darn good. But on business taxes, we don't look so good. We also had McKinsey, a consulting firm that advises us on a lot of this benchmarking work, looked at over 200 non-cost factors in terms of what drives business decisions. Things like education level of the workforce, ease of doing business, regulatory standards, quality of life of different areas. And we said aggregate those up and into a bundle of different major factors that we can kind of get our arms around. And what we found is that on virtually every one of those factors, about 100 we looked at in total, that Michigan ranks average to below average across the board. Now there's one or two that we do better in than others, but not very many. And so the line that I have been using is that it's kind of like charging Nordstrom prices for Macy's product. And that's kind of what Michigan's problem is. We have a kind of a slightly above average cost structure. The competition we are up against is primarily below average, and our product is average to below average as well. So that's not a good place to be if you're running a business. So our view is that, look, we were a top 10 state. We can be again. Let's set that as our goal. We looked at what top 10 states do, and we found there were 4 overwhelming characteristics about them. First is that they're all competitive. And that doesn't mean lowest cost. It doesn't mean a race to the bottom, but it does mean being cognizant of who you're competing against and where you have to price point yourself relative to the competition. Second is that they're cohesive. I'll get to this in a minute, but it's states that work well together and where political, racial, labor, other dividing lines are not so obvious or not so sharp or stark. Third is that they're distinctive. They usually do have 1 or 2 or 3 very distinctive assets that get them to stand out in what is a very crowded global marketplace that we're in today. Where people and jobs can go anywhere, you want to stand out in the crowd. You can't just be as good as everybody else if you're going to win in this game. And the fourth is that they're innovative. They invest in their future. They have terrific higher education programs. They have very innovative programs in terms of how they work and how they govern themselves. So we built a plan around the facts, not around anecdotes, not around what we thought made sense, not around what people wanted on our board, but around this set of facts. And it's a 5-step plan, and I'll start with the first step of that plan, which is you've got to manage your money just like you do in your own governments, your own businesses that you're part of. State government doesn't do a very good job of that. They only budget 1 year at a time. They only look at their finances out 1 year at a time. They don't get input, from the private sector on a real-time basis in terms of what the business conditions are to be able to project their revenues and spending very well. And that's why you see these constant budget surprises in Lansing. Our suggestion is they change that to multi-year forecasting, multi-year budgeting, and public-private partnerships to do their revenue forecasting. Second is, not like any other business or any other government, most of the state government's costs are in the labor force. State government likes to talk about cutting, and they have, but they talk about cutting programs rather than where the money is. The money's in people. And so rather than cutting state troopers off the roads or cutting prisons or cutting promised scholarships, the real challenge is how do we revise the compensation, benefit, and retirement system of public employees. Now, state government workers, great folks. I headed up a state agency for 10 years. But the reality is that they make, right now, about 8% more than the average state worker in other states and about $17,000 more than the average private sector worker in Michigan. Their benefits are 2 times better than the average state worker in the U.S., 3 times better than the average private sector worker in Michigan. Those things have to change. And they have to change fast if we're going to get Michigan back on track. There are clearly other things that can be done beyond that. For example, in the schools, the same problem. The school workforce is, to some degree, even has a more pronounced problem in that the benefits there are even richer than they are for state workers. Teachers are still on defined benefit plans rather than defined contribution, which state workers went to a decade ago. Now, the teacher retirement bills, regardless of how you feel about those, the legislation that passed a few weeks ago really was very important to start putting a more sustainable compensation structure in place for teachers over the long run. It saved $3 billion over 10 years. Good step forward. Not quite enough, but a good step forward. And then beyond that, we're very much in favor of service consolidation. We are not necessarily advocating for the consolidation of local government. We know how hard that is both for the governments and for the people that they serve. But we do question with 1,800 units of local government whether we need 1,800 HR, IT, budgeting, et cetera, administrative functions, and then even at the programmatic level, how many services could be shared across jurisdictional lines. We know there's a lot of work going on over here in West Michigan in that regard. We applaud that. I think you guys can actually be a model for the rest of the state if you can push those things forward. Beyond that, in some programmatic areas, corrections is one in particular we've cited as needing reform. People usually think of that as being we just got to let more prisoners go free and that's the way to reduce costs. We don't agree with that. If you look at the cost to house a prisoner in Michigan, it's 30% more on average than it is in Ohio. We don't understand that. We think it's a management issue, there's a structural issue there, and we think that that needs to be attacked more aggressively than it has been. Third step of our plan is that we do think taxes need to be reformed. We don't think we can cut our way to prosperity, and we do think that the problem of unstable state revenues is part of the problem that Michigan has to be able to invest in things that are important for its future. We also think that taxes, as we said to you before, is at least part of the reason why Michigan's not cost competitive. So we put our neck out there and said, you know what? We need to tax services. We have a tax system today that's antiquated, just taxing manufacturing. We should tax services. We should extend the sales tax to services. We should lower the rate from 6 to 5.5% was our proposal, and we should exempt all business-to-business transactions so there's no pyramiding effect. And if we do that, the money that's collected from that should go to reducing the Michigan business tax. A tax that you saw earlier puts us about 35th to 40th worst, or most, if you will, least competitive business tax in America. Let's lower that by $1 billion, which means that every business in the state would get about a 50% reduction in their MBT. Automatically, that gives us a way to create jobs, to create more revenue, to get the revenue stream up, and at the same time, by taxing services, we have a more stable revenue flow. Look at the difference between the stability of the school aid fund versus the general fund. General fund's down 30% this decade. School aid fund is up about 5 or 10%. It's because of sales taxes. Sales taxes are a more stable source of revenue. Clearly, other things we can do to improve our competitiveness in the area of tax reform, but I'm going to skip for the sake of time on to the fourth step, which is investing in our future. Most states haven't had Michigan's luxury of wealth to be able to do everything pretty well. So we have, for example, funded K-12 education as a top 10 state. We rank 8th in per capita funding for K-12 education. We rank high in our support for healthcare investments. We have ranked historically high in areas like higher education and even transportation in the past. We think going forward we're going to have to narrow that list down, and there are 2 areas that we think we need to invest in and 2 that we need to strategize about. The 2 we need to invest in are higher education and transportation. Here's why higher education is important, and that includes community colleges. I think you've heard before, if you look at the demands, the educational demands for current jobs, right now we have about 25% of our workforce that has about 61% of our workforce today has a high school degree or less, and only 39% has a community college degree or more in the workforce. The demands in the future are going to increase the demand for community college or more to 75%. So more than double the education requirements we have today. And that's going to require a huge investment and a huge push into getting people with more educational skills. So we think that's an area we do need to invest in. Here's where we rank today in per capita support for higher education, 31st in the country. You would need to spend over $1 billion more a year in Michigan to get that up to a top 10 state. Whereas in K-12 education, as I mentioned, we are already a top 10 spending state. We believe that with some of the reforms to teacher compensation, the service sharing that I talked about earlier, we feel that that money should stay in the education system and use that to improve classroom performance. Infrastructure, the good news is that Michigan is in a great geographic position to take advantage of being able to move goods and services. We're viewed as being a place that we already have the largest trade barrier with Canada across the river in Detroit. We're a rail center. We have an opportunity to be more of an air cargo center. But what we're not doing is investing in it. Our road conditions aren't very good, ranking in the middling of the pack to lower end of the pack of the 50 states. And it's because, in large part, we don't invest in it. We rank 46th among the 50 states in investment in transportation. Again, it would cost over $1 billion a year to get Michigan up to being a top 10 state in transportation spending, which is probably closer to where we need to be. The other thing is we think that there are 2 assets that we have we need to take more advantage of. One is the Great Lakes. Great Lakes being a place that gives us a unique recreational, outdoor, environmental position in the marketplace relative to others. We do a good job using it to market to tourists. We don't do a very good job of using it to retain and attract people and to have people think of this place differently than they do today. And the other is our cities. You look at where our cities rank relative to top 10 states, not very good. You look at the top 10 states and where their cities rank, very good. Having vibrant urban areas is important for young people and people of all ages. It is really the symbol of the vibrancy of our state. And so we think an urban redevelopment strategy is needed in Michigan. We don't feel that we really have one today. The last is that you need an economic development strategy as well. So even if you do the first 4 steps, economic development's important. There are people out there today running for office that say abolish the MEDC. We think that's a very ridiculous thought for the state to do that. And we think that, having said that, there are changes that need to be made in our economic development approach. Namely, our focus ought to be on innovation and entrepreneurism rather than picking individual companies or individual sectors. This chart shows you that we lag in the startup of new businesses and the entrepreneurial climate in our state, yet we have great innovation assets like R&D and high-tech investment that we can leverage better to drive those numbers higher. These are some charts that show just at the university level how competitive we are relative to some other areas that are known for being very, very attractive places to grow and create businesses and grow and create new types of businesses, new types of jobs. So again, our thought is that we need to do more to promote that, and our approach would be very simple, is that let's de-emphasize trying to put our resources and incentives behind target industries and target sectors, and let's benefit all businesses of all types. And let's invest that money into building up the infrastructure to support entrepreneurism across our state, whether they be business incubators, accelerators, venture capital, and the like. Plant a lot of seeds rather than just a few. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this 5-step plan, we believe, can't take root unless Michigan is more cohesive. Don mentioned earlier how the CEOs of the state came together as one Michigan to try to drive an agenda and to try to support our state to move forward. I get to talk to groups like this all over Michigan. And usually what I hear is when I come to West Michigan, things about Southeast Michigan. Or when I go to Southeast Michigan, what are they thinking over in West Michigan? Or when I go up to the Upper Peninsula, what are they doing down the Lower Peninsula? We're a geographically divided state. We're a labor management divided state. We're a racially divided state. We're a politically divided state. I'll leave you with just one story that summarizes all of this. One of our CEOs is building the new plant for Volkswagen in Tennessee. Tennessee beat Michigan a few years ago to get that facility. We were the runners-up. We actually beat them on the incentive package. CEO asked the CEO of Volkswagen why we lost, and he said, yeah. He said, I read the newspapers a couple years ago and saw that you had racial divisions, Kwame Kilpatrick, Monica Conyers, and all the racial fallout in Detroit. Read that you had a lot of labor disputes. American Axle was the biggest work stoppage in America in 2007 when that decision was made. See that you've got a lot of political problems. First government shutdown over the budget debates up in Lansing where we couldn't agree on a budget for the year 2008. Said I also see where you've got a lot of regional fights. Brooks Patterson, the mayor of Detroit, fighting over Cobo Hall. These are just some of the examples he gave. He said in Tennessee, room like this, 50 city managers, county executives came together, and none of them were from Chattanooga where the plant's being built, and one guy stood up for 2 minutes and said, look, I just want to let you know that we want you in Tennessee. It's all about Tennessee, not about Chattanooga. It's all about Tennessee because if you come down here, you're going to help all of us. And we're going to be here for you. We want you to know that if you run into problems with state government 5, 10, 20 years from now, we're going to be here for you. CEO turned back to my CEO and said, do you think that would have ever happened in Michigan? Wouldn't have. Wouldn't have. And that's the problem. We've got to get over these divisions. We've got to stop shooting ourselves in the foot. No one's coming to our rescue. We've spent the stimulus money to shore up our budget for the last 3 years, and it's gone. We have really not much to show for it. The day of reckoning now comes next year, unfortunately, for a new governor and a new legislature to deal with. But I'm here to say to you that the most important thing you can do is to get engaged in the process and to talk to candidates for office, talk to elected officials that are in there now, and let them know what's important to you for Michigan. But more importantly, what's important not just for your region, but for our whole state, and how important it is that they work across party lines and that they work across regional lines to build the alliances that are going to be needed to move this state forward. So with that, Don, I'm going to stop and let George get up here and continue the discussion, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. I quickly switch this over here, and hopefully we can. I can. Absolutely. There we go. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming here this morning. Thank Doug for the presentation, and thank the group for all of the work they've put in. Don, thank you for the great introduction. Thank you for the opportunity a couple of years ago to get involved in West Michigan. I think my presentation will go over how being involved in West Michigan is it really sets this region apart and I think makes us different. And I don't mean that to follow up right after Doug saying we need to be together and West Michigan as a whole. I'll use West Michigan quite a lot in this presentation, but part of that is Michigan. When we deal with businesses and we deal with companies all across the United States and around the world, we're Michigan. They think of Michigan first. So a strong Michigan makes a strong West Michigan. Quickly, just want to go over some kind of basic facts about the region. I think that living in this region, we take for granted our size and our assets. We are the 33rd largest metropolitan center in the United States. We are a big community. All of us are part of a big community. 1.3 million people. We often compare ourselves to the Fort Worths and Fort Waynes and other smaller communities, but we're more like Jacksonville or Oklahoma City, and the amount of people and the amount of jobs and the amount of industry and what we have here. 13th among the world's top knowledge economies, one of the best areas to turn ideas, that entrepreneurship that you'll see through. Highly qualified workforce. Why is this important? Why is it important that we have 50% of our population is under the age of 35? When businesses are moving or looking at an area, they want to know that they have a workforce that's up and coming. Ottawa County, Kent County, and West Michigan are growing communities, which is great that we still have a growing communities conference in a growing community. Our population in this area has continued to increase at a slower rate, but we are a growing. We have more people here. So having that, knowing that those individuals will be coming up and you have that workforce. More than 1/3 have a post-secondary education. Doug went over the need for that in the future, that really every job that we deal with and every prospect, very rarely is just a high school education good enough anymore for every industry, from production to IT to data centers to financial institutions. We have 20 area colleges educating over 150,000 students. We are in West Michigan an educational powerhouse. We're sitting in one of those institutions today. We often don't think of ourselves as a college town or a college region, but we have more students than larger areas that we think of, like Columbus, Ohio, or even Ann Arbor, Michigan. So here's the standard chart that everyone measures West Michigan and their economic growth and where we stand. Unemployment. This number, I personally think, is one that we jump on too much, that isn't the best measure of really how strong our economy is, but it's what we always see. And across the state, we can see that unemployment levels peaked out in the fourth quarter of 2009 through the first quarter of 2010. And it has come down from a high of 14.5 to 14%. Our graph on the bottom in West Michigan is slightly a little bit more jagged. That's just because we have a smaller population and changes can make a bigger difference. But trending, we've seen that the peak in West Michigan was at the same time, the December, January, February area, that businesses are doing better. We see that the most recent numbers in April went down to 11.3%. When the May numbers come out, certainly expect those to be around that 11.3, a little bit lower. We don't expect a 1.5% dip that we had. Some of that's seasonal work, but the region did last month add over 7,000 jobs while increasing the workforce. And the workforce is what we have here, and I think this is a better number to judge where we're at. How many people are working in your community? How many people are looking for work in your community? Is your workforce growing? It's easy to have your unemployment lower if your workforce is shrinking. Well, as you can see here, we see that same dip in the bottom kind of happening in that December, January, beginning of 2010. And we really see that coming back. In a recent meeting that we had with about 40 manufacturers in the region, we had a question, how many of you are expecting to hire this year? And out of 40 of them, I'd say between 25 and 30 said, yeah, I'm expecting to hire this year. And in my position, I work with about 100, 150 companies a year. Locally, we deal with nationally too, but the ones locally recently, and I see some of our partners in the audience that I get to go out, the stories have been much more positive in the recent months. We really have seen the number of projects for local companies growing, feeling comfortable to make that investment, to hire those new people to fill that backup, pent-up demand, are really starting to fall into line. And we recently had some good news, and I think that we're going to have a little bit more positive news here in the future with companies continuing to expand. Also, as Doug said, this is a national issue. I think too often we see in the news media that we think that it's just Michigan that's going through this, or it's just Grand Rapids, or just West Michigan that's having this issue. And we think of other communities and the grass is always greener there. Well, it's not. Everyone is going through this issue. Even communities that we think of as huge successes like Charlotte and Portland, models of how communities and economic development should be working, are going through the same unemployment issues as we are now. We also have a larger percentage of our economic power put in manufacturing, and that's been great for this region. But the jobs and the industry that's been affected the most is manufacturing. Having that larger percentage, it's certainly made our job of creating jobs and retaining jobs much more challenging. And by this chart, you can see that West Michigan has held its own compared to our peer communities across the United States in keeping jobs in all of our industries. I'm going to go through kind of now where we see our industries, where our breakdown is, where do people work, what are the jobs, and then with some of our economic modeling, where are some of the forecasts? What industries do we see growing over the next 10 years? What jobs do we see as the highest gainers over the next couple of years? So employment by industry, manufacturing at 18.6%. That's probably no surprise to everyone in this room. I think this number is slightly misleading, though, that when you hear manufacturing, I think traditionally people think of just production workers. And these slides are when we hear that 18% of our employment is in manufacturing, that includes every single person that works at Steelcase, every single person that works at Amway, from marketing to design to finance to accounting. All of those are accounted in that industry. So when we think of ourselves in manufacturing, that manufacturing encompasses a wide range of service, a wide range of occupations, of talented and diverse jobs that we have in this region, followed up by professional business services and healthcare. So using our economic modeling, where do we see industries growing in West Michigan compared to the United States as a whole? And I think the positive thing that you can take from this slide, and the red line is West Michigan, the orange line is Michigan, and the black line is the United States, is that in West Michigan, and even Michigan as a whole, as percentage growth rate in industries, we in West Michigan are on par with what we expect the growth rate in those industries to be across the United States. And in some, we're much higher. Educational services goes back to us being an education powerhouse, how many jobs and how many people we have in education. Professional services, administrative. The only one that we actually lag behind nationally dramatically is real estate, leasing, and growth in that industry, and I certainly think that we can probably understand why. Obviously, healthcare continuing to grow, but I think the good news that we can take from this is that all the numbers would expect us to continue to grow. Now, is that good enough? I think Doug showed that we have a lot of catching up to do. So growing at the same pace, if we're running at the same speed and we're starting 100 feet behind, we need to catch up. And this doesn't necessarily show that we're going to catch up, but it certainly shows that the slide that we've dealt with over the past 10 years, that we're poised to come out of that. Employment by occupation, I like this a lot better because in economic development, we deal with companies that are looking for people with skills. We deal with jobs, and when local companies are growing, they need people in a specific engineering or a specific financial background. And do we have those? And often just saying we have people in this industry doesn't paint that picture. So here you can see that a vast majority, 15.9%, people work in service industry, food preparation. We obviously know that the retail and service industry are the largest, followed by office and administrative support. And then the production number is what we think of as our traditional manufacturing. It's still at 13.8%, followed by retail, sales, construction. And at the bottom there, you can see educational services and healthcare. We certainly expect those numbers that are in the 7% range to continue to grow up. Here's the breakdown that we expect over the next 10 years for growth by industry or by occupation. And again, healthcare practitioner and services, growth rates of over 20%. Probably not news with what we've seen with the investment, with the change here. What I think is very interesting is the third one, art, design, and entertainment, the creative jobs. We've had some recent stories of businesses coming together to collaborate on some of that creative marketing design that we were in West Michigan, the Center of Design with Kendall College, and now some of that being revitalized. We'd love to see that as a growing industry, that those talented and skillful people here predicted to grow, I think bodes well for our future. So with these numbers and what we do at Right Place, why are we positive? I've been there for 3 years. I would say probably most people would say 3 difficult economic years, but they've been good. I'm very privileged to meet with companies and see where they're growing, why are they in Michigan, and the fact that most of them still do believe in Michigan and are happy to be here in West Michigan. We deal with clients looking at West Michigan from all over the United States and all around the world. This is just a quick picture of where companies from outside of West Michigan have located. People from all across the United States have come here and have chosen to invest in West Michigan. They believe that their business and their future is here, which makes you feel good that someone from California or Florida, that we have a perception of Michigan, believes that their business can grow here. And certainly you all hear about Birgit traveling from Europe and Israel and China to recruit companies. This is probably gets the most publicity, though really most of our business and most of our projects are nationally, and most of them are with companies that are already located here and already growing here. But we've brought in companies from all across Europe. We're currently dealing with 9 prospects from across the United States, 4 prospects from Europe. Just had a great meeting last week with a bioenergy company out of Germany. So the point is that people are still looking here. People still believe in West Michigan. We're still on the radar for businesses looking to relocate. Over the last year and a half, these are the number of prospects that we've had, broken out by industry. 161 over the last 70 weeks. That's literally every other day a company's looking to grow or a company's looking to expand into West Michigan. That's very positive news. It's kept us very busy. We've had really, as an organization, our best 2 years of people growing and laying the foundation for the future. The breakdown by industry, as you can tell here, is manufacturing. I think that if we would have looked at this graph maybe 5 to 10 years ago, that large blue slice that represents manufacturing might have been 50 to 70%. As you can see, we've had to break down where information technology, bio and life sciences, which we're just starting to see the spin-off companies looking at the area coming in here. Headquarters. Alternative energy is actually our largest growth sector for companies looking to grow and expand in the area. And obviously, great reasons for that investment and that new interest. Grand Rapids and West Michigan being a sustainable community, a green community, really puts us on the radar for that industry. So here's the results and why we believe that there's a positive future. All of these companies have decided to invest their future, their employees' futures, and their families' futures in West Michigan. They've bet that this region's going to keep growing. They've decided that this is the best place to be for them. Very successful, like I said, but a wide range of products from Roscam Baking, which is a food processing company, Global Forex, which is an international online currency trading company that is based out of Grand Rapids Township here in Michigan. Wonderful company, nationally known, has offices all across the world, could have been in London, probably should be in New York, but it chose to stay here and find the people here in West Michigan. MedBio, again, the growth in what we've seen in the medical and bio industry. Farmers Foremost Insurance, great project. They just had their topping off of their new multi-100,000 square foot facility off of M6 there. That will be a great addition to the West Michigan community, 1,600 jobs there. All the way down to traditional automotive in Atwood with Bentler. And then most recently, ConAgra in Kentwood, another national company that could choose to expand anywhere. Had options in Minnesota, had options in Nebraska, had other options in the Tennessee area, but chose Michigan, chose West Michigan, and chose us to decide to make this investment, to grow, and to put their new people in, hopefully their R&D center. So all of that totaling over the last year and a half is over 4,000 jobs and over $260 million in new investment. So we certainly do believe that there is a good future, and other people believe that there's a good future for business here in West Michigan. And why has this happened? Why have we seen sort of numbers be different here in West Michigan than other Midwest communities? What have we done here slightly differently? And I think Mayor Buck spoke to that earlier, and I kind of put it differently. West Michigan's odd. We are not like any other community that I have ever been to. In my business, we travel all across to different areas to meet with site selectors, to meet with corporate real estate, to meet with businesses and areas and to see how they're growing and what they're doing to be successful. Our competition is global. So why are we different? Because we are. The amount of collaboration, the public-private partnership, a community investing in itself at all levels from the top to the bottom. I know that we always think of the great philanthropic donors, but all of you here this morning, learning more about the region. I mean, I don't want to show of hands, but how many of you are invested in making West Michigan a better place every day? I'm very lucky to be able to meet with companies that are working every day to make West Michigan a better place, to meet with local municipal leaders, local nonprofit leaders, and in every citizen that are working, that really genuinely care about the region. And so we have had a unique vision here in West Michigan, and it started a long time ago. I have this picture of downtown from 1975 because I really think that you can trace back a change in course for West Michigan to 25 to 30 years ago. We decided that we were going to invest in diversifying to different businesses, that investing in medical and health sciences were great, the alternative energy, the plastics. We're a community that's reinvented itself many times, from lumber to home furnishing to office furniture to auto supply to plastics to now into medical. And as Doug said, there's no one silver bullet. So the answer to that is to have lots of bullets, to have lots of different industries, to be diverse, to work with all different types of companies. Community development, the reinvestment in our core communities, which has been key. I really think that that's a plan that started in the late 70s and early 80s that is just now, I really think, coming to fruition, where you're seeing the spin-offs, where we put these anchor investments in downtown into other communities. And now other people are coming along and realizing that that being there for the last 10 years or the last 15 years has made all this other development in other businesses viable in a community. Protection of our natural assets, improvements in transportation and airport. Certainly we do support that we could use better Michigan highways. When we bring prospects in, we have to drive them all over the place, and not having that present well is an issue. But the growth in our airports, the investment in transportation, the investment in our ports along Lake Michigan, and even more recently, the investment in our train and railroad transportation as a viable option. Again, being diverse, not putting all your eggs in one basket, that we have multiple options here in West Michigan to be able to get goods and services in and out. And then education, having a state institution and growing universities like Calvin, like Grand Valley, like Aquinas in West Michigan are drivers for that innovation, for the entrepreneurship, and for the talent influx that those companies that we work with that are growing and changing and diversifying every day need. Mayor Buck spoke about this morning, and I think that I hope that we're the model community across the United States for how this can be successful and how we can even grow more. Public-private partnerships with Grant Action in the right place where we work, established 25 years ago this year, seems pretty normal to have that public-private partnership for economic development. 25 years ago, we were the second in the nation to do that. Friends of Grand Rapids Parks, and I know Steve will be here later today to explain his organization and how that works. But this, I think, is an amazing model of how we attack problems in West Michigan and how we find people who are invested and willing to take their time, their energy, and their money and put it towards a public commodity that may not be able to be funded how it had traditionally in the past. All of you as municipalities know that certainly budgets are crunched, and finding ways to fund those extras that make a big deal is becoming more difficult. The model that I think Friends of Grand Rapids Parks is using, and I believe will be successful with in the city of Grand Rapids, can be transformed all across the region. And I think as soon as the word gets out, it's going to be taken and borrowed liberally and used across the country. To find a group of people as your advocates, to have the government and private entities working together to support a public commodities is something that I think that we should be proud of in West Michigan. We should grow in West Michigan. I think Steve will tell you a good story about that either. Regional nonprofit groups, West Michigan Strategic Alliance, great, Environmental Action Council, and all of our area foundations. We've been very lucky to have the philanthropic base that we have here. Again, that's odd. We're odd. The only other community that competes with us at that level is Salt Lake City, Utah. And obviously being the base of major religious, that's why they are there. So we're odd. Education and business. GRCC has implemented new training and new education services in wind and medical. Grand Valley is internship program, great, wonderful, to be able to keep that talent here, to connect businesses to education, and business to business, something that our companies here work together during the day and compete. Even our most competitive industries are willing to share and grow together and make that pie bigger in West Michigan and decide how to cut it up later. Diversity. I know that we always talk here about diversity of people, but I want to talk quickly about diversity of business. 18 different business sectors ranked in the top 50 nationally. Think of our leading companies, Perigo, Amway, Wolverine, all across that we have a diverse group of industries. Diversity of place, everyone knows how great West Michigan is, from Lake Michigan to fishing to nature to our great core communities. And diversity of people, nearly 80,000 foreign-born citizens here in West Michigan. So you don't have to just take my word for it. Here's some words from people outside of the region and what they've said positive about West Michigan. Fortune magazine, if any of you haven't seen it, take a look at it. It's a great positive story of a Michigan success story, how we've done things here. And America's Greenest City in Fast Company magazine. So in conclusion, companies and individuals based locally, nationally, and internationally have chosen West Michigan as a place they want to invest and grow for the future. This continued investment from all parties will position Grand Rapids and West Michigan for success in the coming decades. Thank you.
Doug, can we have you come up? Tell you what we're going to do. We've got time for a couple of questions for these two gentlemen right here. And if I don't see any hands, I got one myself. Questions? This is the opportunity right here. All right, Keith.
Certainly have been following the turnaround plan and suggestions that you've had. Have noticed that it hasn't, in particular, the recommendation to expand the base of the sales tax and decrease the rate. Those that need to follow that recommendation have been a little slow to follow that. Can you give us an update or hopes for the future of if that will take hold?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, the challenge was doing this in an election year. I mean, we actually thought hard and fast about whether we should just wait to launch the turnaround plan until next year rather than this year, but our board felt like Michigan couldn't wait another year, and so we thought we'd give it a good college try to see if we could get some progress made. And, you know, again, I think looking at it big picture, getting things like the retirement bills through was very important. But the sales tax is a tough issue to take on in an election year. You're really asking a lot from politicians, especially this year with Tea Party movements and all of that, utter the T word. But, you know, when you look at the responses that we got back to the gubernatorial candidate questionnaires, and they're posted on our website, so you can go to MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com and look at them for yourself. I think it's pretty clear that they're trying to kind of hedge their bets, realizing that they're going to need that flexibility when they get into office to be able to put together kind of a holistic package of reforms. And you know, our view is a tax reform is almost a necessity to make that happen. So, you know, short answer, wouldn't be too hard on them saying that they didn't make any, progress this year because of their own, elections. But I think next year you're going to see this come back up again. I do.
Okay, we've got time for one more. I saw another hands over here, someplace. Yep, right there.
Thank you. My question is for George. I'm wondering locally, I didn't see anything around. I saw social services kind of in some of those growth areas, but I'm wondering where the nonprofit sector falls as far as either growth development or kind of as a whole, what its stronghold is in Grand Rapids, West Michigan.
Obviously, that sector makes up a larger portion of our economy here, and I know the Grand Rapids Community Foundation just recently did a study showing that we have nearly 2,500 separate nonprofits contributing nearly $1 billion worth of economic vitality into the community. I don't have any numbers as to where that sector is growing because, unfortunately, it's lumped into services and business and administrative support. So certainly, we see that as an area that's growing here. It is core to everything else that works and is a great driver. Like I said, that number of $1 billion of economic impact annually just from our nonprofit sector is something that's really invaluable for West Michigan.
Executive Director's prerogative. Gentlemen, to both of you, I want both of you to answer this question. We're from West Michigan. We live here, we work here, we play here, we learn here. Why in blazes should we care about Detroit? Go.
Well, because when you get outside of Michigan, people think of Detroit. They don't think of Michigan, in a simple answer. You go internationally, I think, George will say this, is that people know Detroit more than they've ever heard of Michigan. And so Detroit is the image of this state, like it or not. And unless we get Detroit to be at least not a negative, if we can at least get it up to be, a neutral in terms of perception, it's going to continue to be kind of an image drag on the state. The other thing is that look at it from just a pure economic standpoint. Half the population in the state lives in southeast Michigan. 800,000 of them live in the city of Detroit. Of the 800,000 that live in the city of Detroit, about half of them are living under the poverty level. So when people, and this is a little pet Doug Rothwell peeve, when people compare Michigan to Minnesota, for example, why can't we be like Minnesota? Minnesota doesn't have 400,000 people living under the poverty line in Minneapolis. That's why. That's why our numbers aren't as good. And so unless we fix Detroit and unless we fix those systemic problems, Michigan's not going to look like Minnesota anytime soon.
I would absolutely agree with that. When you meet with anyone nationally, even nationally, people don't know Grand Rapids or know West Michigan necessarily. They know Detroit. Internationally, certainly Detroit is the first thing that comes to mind when you say Michigan. And having that as a positive would make our job so much easier. We are, as Doug said, like it or not, tied to that community. No matter how different we are on all different levels than that, that we are politically bound together. And perception across the United States and around the world is that we are all part of the same area. And that having that grow and be positive would help us so much with that perception. And not only would help us with perception, but think of how many companies are here because of what was happening in Detroit 40, 30 years ago. And how positive even having that big of a community growing and being an economic engine and the spinoffs of that would be for West Michigan. I think that's a positive that's overlooked often that would be here. So certainly having that, that's why we should care. It does affect us. It directly affects us. It affects business decisions every day. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in thanking Mr. Rothwell and Mr. Bosnjak? Super duper, guys. Nice job. Okay, we are behind